You're listening to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast, your podcast for escaping life's monotony, indulging in your wildest travel fantasies, and discovering the constant beauty of this ever-changing world. On this week's episode, we're joined by special guest Neil Laird, who shares about his experiences traveling through Egypt. Welcome to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. We are your navigators, Allison
and Regan. And here we are with another Travel Tuesday coming at you. We have a really, really fun destination, and I'm so excited to talk about it because I feel like not a lot of people can talk about it, and the person that we have as our guest today is going to really be able to talk about it, so you are in for a treat. But of course, before we get to introduce our guest for the day, Allie, plug away at social media.
Yep, keep it short and sweet here because the guest is super exciting for today. But social media, you can find us on Instagram at Wanderlusting Wives, X at Wanderlust Wives, Facebook Wanderlusting Wives Podcast. And we'd love to hear from you if you want to connect with us. You can email us. That's wanderlustingwives@gmail.com. So without further ado, our exciting guest for today is Neil Laird. He is the author of Primetime Travelers, and we are so excited to have him share all about Egypt. So welcome, Neil. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you both for having me. I never pass the opportunity to talk about Egypt. So thank you.
We're so excited. Yeah. So I'd love to start by giving you an opportunity, though, to talk about your book, talk about your experience in the film industry, too, because I know that that's a huge part of what you've done and how you've gotten to travel. So go ahead. The floor is yours. We'd love to hear about you and your experiences.
I'll try to keep it short and sweet as well so we can dive into Egypt and the main topic. But Egypt really has governed the last probably 30, 40 years of my life over two careers in ways I wouldn't have expected. For 25 years, and still am a TV producer, documentaries for National Geographic, PBS, BBC, with a focus on archaeology and history, international travel. I've been to some 70-some countries around the world, doing all manner of big budget and small budget and everything in between shows for the networks. But my very first film I did back in 1996 was about the Great Sphinx of Egypt. It was my thesis film that I did for grad school. And I actually was able to go to the Sphinx and sell it to the Learning Channel, and that got me off and running. And for, as I say, 20 plus years, I did many, many shows similar. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I wanted to transition to different kind of storytelling. So I wrote a fictional fantasy time travel book based on a TV crew who travels back to ancient Egypt. So I've taken everything that I've learned over the last quarter century and just sort of mixed it up and made a fun, comedic time travel romp that I came out on Amazon in May called Primetime Travelers. And then the sequel, Primetime Pompeii, which is right there in the title where we go, comes out in October. And then I'm currently working on the third one, which is Primetime Troy.
Wow, you've been busy.
Yeah, that's so fun. Like the mix of travel and like adventure. Like, it's kind of in a historical fiction kind of way, but we got that like adventure and that heist and the fiction coming into it. That's really interesting. How did you decide that that's the direction you wanted to go in?
In the book or in the TV world?
In the book.
I think because even though I do nonfiction, it's called factual or documentary, depending on where you are in the world and what network it is, you still have to create a spine that people want to follow. If it's just a dry dysentery about the rise and fall of the pharaohs, it's going to feel like school or something, so people don't want to watch. So if you watch any of the shows on the networks that do talk about ancient history, there's always a mystery and adventure and a secret to be found. You always have the host with the fake Indiana Jones hat off, trying to understand the lost secret of X or the mystery of X. And it's a fun way to build in that kind of the sense of adventure and the Indiana Jones archaeology sweep when you're talking about what could otherwise just be dry history or travel log. So I think that's in my DNA. So when I transitioned to fiction, I just took all those things and I brought them to the forefront because I know people very much want to go on an adventure. Even if it's armchair travel, if you sit down and want to watch a 3-part series about the rise and fall of Rome or whatever, you want it to be fun, right? You want to be transported to ancient Rome. You want to see Pompeii explode. You want to see the gladiators. You want to see Caesar be killed. The stories you've heard a million times already. You want to live vicariously through those very dramatic moments. So the book was a culmination of that, where in a way, I got a bit tired of sticking to the facts. And now, as a TV writer, as a novelist, I can play with all that stuff. I can throw it on. I can still use my desire to focus on the facts and the truth. In Primetime Travelers, they go back to the time of Ramses the Great. And any of my Egyptologist friends, all who read my book with sharp red pencils in hand, said, "Oh, you got this right. That's exactly what we would imagine 13th century BCE to look like as well." So I love to bring that verisimilitude to it. But at the end of the day, it's a comedic travel romp where there's a fake Indiana Jones host and there's a camera crew and they're only there to win an Emmy. So the whole thing is sort of like taking my day job and skewing it to my early love, which is ancient history.
There's clearly so much passion, and that's incredible that you've like taken this opportunity to just explore that and really make something that is fun. And I can't wait to read the books. I'm so excited.
I love what you think. Let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, okay, so let's get into Egypt. Allie, you want to kick us off with an Egypt question for us?
Yeah, this is a simple question, but maybe a loaded answer. Why Egypt? I feel like not a lot of people get to go there, so what sparked that?
It is a tricky place, and we can talk later about the do's and don'ts of Egypt and all the practicalities. It's not an easy destination. But for me, Egypt, I first got just interested in Egypt. I was working in New York City. I got my undergrad degree in filmmaking, and I went to New York thinking I would become Martin Scorsese overnight. Instead, I was the poor schlub holding a walkie-talkie, outside of a grip truck at 2 a.m. And a lot of bloody time on my hands in between. There wasn't much to do when you're broke and you're waiting for the phone not to ring. So I started hanging out at the New York Public Library because it was air conditioned and it was free. And I went to a small Catholic school outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I did not learn a lot about the world. I learned a lot about the Gospels, but beyond that, not much about ancient history. So one day I just picked a book off the shelf about the rise of early civilizations, and I hadn't seen it before, and a penny dropped. I don't know what it was, but it became absolutely fascinated and enamored about these early cultures, the rise of civilization I knew nothing about as a 20-year-old kid or whatever from rural Pennsylvania. But when I got to Egypt, I really got stuck. I thought I'd teach myself all of the rise of history, but when I got to the ancient world, particularly Egypt, there was something which is dazzling about it. And I think partially it's because they did it first and they did it so magically. If you go to the pyramids today, you still look at it and wonder and say, what the bloody hell were they thinking? And how did the bloody hell did they pull this off? And all these questions and mysteries that still remain about Egypt, and they're still there today. Egypt has 1/3 of the world's antiquities. You can get your head around that. Of all the antiquities in the world, 1/3 are basically in the sands of Egypt, largely because they can be preserved under the sand, where up in Europe or whatever, they rot away, they're made of wood, the elements get to them. Egypt is a dry country. It pickles things like the mummies, or it buries them, and they stay that way for eternity. So there's a lot to see. We know a lot about them, but there's so much that's still a mystery. So anyways, my personal experience, I got really tired of waiting for that phone not to ring. So I pulled together the few dollars I had, and I decided to backpack to the Middle East, with Egypt being my first destination. And I climbed the pyramids and I went into tombs that I can never would imagine I would have. And then I also backpacked to the rest of the Middle East, Egypt to Israel, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Jordan. So for 8 months, it was until I think it was on the Iranian border, and I finally ran out of my last $10 as it was time to go back and get a job. I would still be out there today if I had a trust fund.
Wouldn't we all?
But Egypt has always remained. So I don't know if that answers enough. But then, to wrap that up, so when I finally got back to the West, to the States, the question in my mind was, how can I parlay this love of the ancient world into a career? Documentary filmmaking was the way to do that. So I got my master's degree at Columbia College, Chicago, and made my thesis on the Great Sphinx. Went over there and shot there, and I've been doing that ever since. So I kind of leapfrog right into that. So in a way, I tell anybody, if you have a passion, don't be afraid to beat it into the ground and keep going, because you may actually find a lifetime career out of it.
That's incredible. And honestly, something that I myself in life need to hear right now. I think it's few and far between that we find someone who is so passionate about what they do. And I think it's something that we can all become inspired by. And part of what I'm inspired by of what you're saying in this moment is that I'm hearing words like magic and mystery, and I wonder if you could expand on that in terms of how you feel that in Egypt. Like, how do your senses respond to being in a place like that?
It was funny, even after being there maybe a dozen times or so, I still get that prickly feeling when I land there. And Cairo is a noisy, polluted, chaotic city. But even when I land there, I know it's the land of the pharaohs. And I know just over there where the Nile cuts through the city is this magical realm of a culture that somehow has grabbed me and held me fast for the last 30 odd years. But it's really once I get out of Cairo and I get into if you've ever been to Egypt, again, Cairo is a city of 15, 16 million, but just after you leave it, you hit a timeless landscape that looks exactly as it does in pharaonic times. Now, you might see a car and some trash, and you'll see brick instead of mud brick, but you'll still see the people wearing the galabayas and the donkeys and the palm trees and the ruins lying on the hills and the windswept desert. I get a chill thinking about that right now, where it's just timeless landscape. That's what gets me every time. When I get out of Cairo, when I walk into the rural bits of Egypt, it feels like it always has. It just feels, not only I'm stepping back in time, but you can understand why Egypt looms so long for so long, because it's sort of the perfect landscape. The shade is beautiful, the water is appealing, the fruit is sublime. It's just, it's a bit of a Garden of Eden. And after 20 odd years, 30 odd years of going there, that hasn't dimmed for me.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I think it's really special that you found a place that is so magical and mysterious to you and has kind of been off the beaten path for a lot of people who travel. So that's really cool that you've had this connection with this specific place. And the point that I want to go back to is you keep saying once you get out of Cairo. So how do you get out of Cairo? It's rural. It's maybe not as populated. How do you get around Egypt?
I mean, there's multiple ways. If you're talking about it as a tourist, you can do everything from hiring a car and getting a driver, which is fairly cheap. I mean, Egypt is a tourist place. It's off the beaten path, but it's not, because tourism is what keeps that country alive. Egyptians will say, if it wasn't for the pyramids, we would be in Libya. They are a desert Arab country in the Sahara. It's hard to compete with the rest of the world. But what they have is the pyramids and the Sphinx and the Valley of the Kings, and so millions of people come to see that. So that means there's an infrastructure that is set up, and you can do it. I've done all of them. My very first time, I backpacked, and I took a local train all the way down to Luxor, which is the furthest site. The odd thing about the Nile that not many people realize, most rivers flow south. The Nile flows north, so sort of backwards on the map. So if you want to sail down the Nile, you got to go down to Sudan and then sail up to Alexandria, the Mediterranean. And that's how most tours go. So when people go to Egypt, what they normally do is they fly into Cairo, and you must see Cairo because that's what the pyramids in Saqqara and the Egyptian Museum, the new Gem Museum, the Grand Egyptian Museum, which hasn't opened yet but soon will, the King Tut Mask. And then what most people do is they go back to the airport and they take a 1-hour flight to Luxor, which is 500 miles south, and that's where the Valley of the Kings are, King Tut, Luxor, Karnak, and all the other special temples and tombs. And you can see that for 2 or 3 days. Then people often get on a felucca, which is a sailboat, particularly when you're younger. You can just sail for 2 or 3 days because it never rains. And then the evening you pull off to the side of the river and you sleep. And you get up the next day and maybe see a temple or a tomb and then glide your way down again. It's a beautiful way to see it. You can also do it by a air-conditioned car or whatever else. It's very hot there. And, there's a lot of people in your face, backsheesh and stuff. So it's not the easiest of destinations. So I recommend anyone who goes for the first time should definitely have some help. They should have some handler of some kind.
Mm-hmm. It's funny to hear Luxor in the context it's meant to be heard in, which is that it's a city, it's a place to go visit. But I learned Luxor playing a computer game growing up.
Shame, lady, for shame.
I know.
The hotel in Vegas, so I'll give you that much.
Okay, fair enough. So it's cool to hear it in this context that me as a 5-year-old, I was like, it's a fun game. But I also want to hear too, like, so we're talking about how it's dry, it never rains, because of that, does that make it a place that would be good to visit anytime? Like, I'd imagine you've been there pretty much any time of year at this point. Anytime, or is there a specific time that's better than
I mean, right now it's roasting, that part of the world. I just got back from a month in
Mm.
Turkey, which is just north of it, and it was 95 degrees every day, which probably means it's 110 at Luxor.
Mm.
I've probably been to Egypt more time in August or July than any other time for whatever reason. That's when we shoot, or that's when my friends can travel, depending on the kind of trip. The best time is the fall. It's beautiful at Christmas. It never gets cold. It never rains. You could sit outside with a light sweater in Luxor, in January. That's perfectly fine. Most of the tours go fall or early in the year because you beat the cold of the north. But it is sweltering right now. If you were walking around the Giza Plateau right now, you would have to need a lot of water, and you'd want to have that air-conditioned van really close.
Mm. Yeah, I think that sounds about right. And I'm also kind of curious at this point too, if like fall you say is a great time to visit. Does that align with tourist season, or is there a specific tourist season?
There really isn't a tourist season. Christmas is naturally always very popular because people are on holidays.
Mhm.
Summer right now, even though it's hot, is popular because it's a big tourist season. All
Right.
the UK shuts down, all of Western Europe shuts down, people go on holiday.
Mhm.
And then what you have in not everybody goes to see the ruins though. They usually do a day trip. A lot go to Sharm el Sheikh or Hurghada, which are two resort towns on the Red Sea to go snorkeling.
Mm.
So if you want to go on your beach holiday, you still have the Red Sea to do that, and that's perfect for Christmas or perfect for the fall as well. So it's not a bad time to go to Egypt, and I don't think the prices are any different. Probably flying there at Christmas might be more expensive than going there September, October. Always ideal anywhere in the world
Mhm. Right.
because flights get everything always, particularly around the Mediterranean, flights always go down in by October.
That's a good tip. That also came up with a question here. So, people traveling there, is it common for American tourists to go there? I feel like I don't really know many people who are Americans going to Egypt. And did you feel safe as an American tourist going there?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Americans there. Obviously, it's closer to Europe and elsewhere, so a lot more Europeans might go there. But yeah, Egypt is it's not as difficult to go there as you would assume. I think people, unfortunately, it has a bad rap because it's the Middle East. And there have been incidents of shootings and a few terrorist attacks. Egypt Air has had a few flights that have gone down, and that decimates the tourism business there because so many people rely on it. So I have a lot of friends in that sector, and they're really, really hurt by any plane that goes down or anything that happens. Right now, of course, the war in Israel has a knock-on effect, and people are canceling cruises. So it is very, very fragile. Economy based on whatever's happening in that part of the world. But again, I've been there a dozen times. I have never, ever had any incident, any issues. People are just so happy to see you. Things are cheaper to get around. There's an infrastructure, as I say. Egypt takes security very, very seriously, the government, as you can imagine, because of one of those incidents, and again, it's a $3 billion a year business or something like that. Don't quote me. So when I'm on a shoot, or even I went there with a few friends, like 6 or 7 friends a few years ago, and I think any group of travelers over 5 has an armed guard with them.
Mm.
And that's mostly just to give you comfort, or just to let anyone else know that we have some sort of firearms here. Usually, God bless them, as an 18-year-old kid who just has a gun handed them for their first, and they're very sweet. You buy them dinner, and they forget to their security guard. But it's a sign by the government to let you know that we are aware that coming here comes with some worries, and we're trying to placate that. But again, I've been there good times and bad, and I've never had an incident.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this before on our podcast too, of like, I mean, honestly, you see things in the American news where you're like, wow, this is our own country. But it becomes that like, honestly, it's a stereotype that we then kind of internalize, is that like, oh, traveling to Egypt, like maybe don't do that. But like we forget sometimes that a couple of bad instances are not necessarily representative of the full population of a country.
Of anywhere, clearly, and I think they become very stereotypical. We don't, because people aren't scouring the news about when is a good time to go to Egypt or whatever. Whatever rumor persists.
Right.
again, I was in Turkey last week, and I was talking to a guy at a kebab shop who was practicing his English, and he's very much fascinated by me and my husband, who are from New York. He goes, "Oh, I hear New York is the most dangerous place on the planet. I would never ever go there because I hear people die all the time." And he's thinking of New York in like 1977 or
Yeah.
whatever. He probably saw and he's basing all his experience on that. So it goes both ways. We all have these stereotypical boxes we like to put countries and people in.
Right.
And I find one of the reasons I love the Arab world, and not just Egypt, but the Jordanians, the Iranians, they're so happy to see you. They just say, "Oh, I'm so glad you don't think we are what your government or your media says."
Right.
I'm not saying there's not rogue people out there at anywhere. Just like, I'm in Brooklyn. I could walk 2 miles east and get mugged.
Right.
A lot quicker than going to Tehran.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
so I mean, we have dangers closer to home.
Yeah.
So I'm not naive enough to think that it's Shangri-La out there, but I have traveled extensively through that part of the world, and I've never seen anything but people that are just happy to see you. Now, they might want to rip you off. They might want to sell you and say it's King Tut's mask when clearly it's made in Taiwan. That's a different story.
And oh goodness, yes. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm really grateful that you've kind of brought this perspective, because it's one that I think is not necessarily commonly shared. And so I'm just really grateful that you kind of brought this energy into this conversation, and hopefully that maybe encourages people to change.
Many people have asked me, I would go to Egypt, but I'm going to wait till things are right. And I tell them, it's not going to be right in your mind. Ever go now.
Right.
Do not wait until the world is right.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a hankering to go to any country, I mean, I wouldn't recommend North Korea right now, or
Right.
a few other places. I wouldn't go to Russia or Ukraine. But beyond war zones, if you can go there, there are tours opening up for Afghanistan right now. It's on my bucket list. I still haven't seen Afghanistan. I wrote a book about Afghanistan under the Taliban, and now that it's mellowed out, all I want to do is see it. There's ways to do those things if you're smart. And if you wait until all the ducks line up in a row, you'll just grow old and die and never see it.
Yeah. Which I think this is a great transition into, okay, so we now know that, like, yes, like there's a smart way to travel to places that you might be a little wary of depending on your amount of research that you've done. So what are the do's and don'ts with it? Like, let's maybe get into that conversation of, when you go to Egypt, what are some of those do's and don'ts, whether it's things to do, how to plan, etc.
I mean, first of all, I would recommend, and I'm a very free spirit, as you can imagine by this point, and I can dive in a lot of places. But I would say, as I did on my first trip, I would go with an organized tour. I would have somebody book it for you, Egypt, and that's largely because, not safety issues, because it's very unwieldy. It's very intimidating. It's a lot of places you don't want to waste time, and people can be very, very intimidating in terms of the money they want to get from you, and you want to have somebody that negotiates that felucca ride or negotiates the tours and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of sites. I went to one called Ramazide Tours a few years ago, but there's many, many others. So I would really recommend having someone help you out if you want. If you want to do it on the cheaper, then certainly do your research. Figure out how much time you have, figure out what you want to see. Like any large country, do you want to just see the pyramids? Do you want to go in between? There's a whole stretch of ruins that are my favorite between Luxor and Egypt, but it takes more time. You'll have to build in all that kind of stuff. You should book your hotels in advance. But it really is an easy place to get around, but because there's so much, and unfortunately for them, but fortunate for us, there were so many hotels and so many guides looking for work because it never quite bounces back completely. So you can get a hotel very cheaply. You can get a guide very cheaply. All the infrastructure is there and easy to negotiate, good cost. But I would definitely do your homework and try to arrange things. It's not a country like flying to Paris or Rome or whatever and just winging it. It's a country you have to sort of like suss out first.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I would just hop into Egypt and stand around and like, okay, what are we going to do next? Like you might be able to do in Paris. Yeah, you could, yeah. So when you're looking for these tours, what are maybe some hot spots that people should look for? Of course, the pyramids are something that you probably want to hit, but what are some other points that they should look for that like tours are offering?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a tourist trail, and I think they're pretty good itinerary for most of them. It depends on if you want to branch off and go to Hurghada in a few days in the Red Sea and snorkeling. If you want to go to Middle Egypt, as I just talking about, and see Abydos, which is my favorite site, and gets almost no tourists. You'll be totally alone in Abydos. And it's a beautiful temple that still has a roof on it. City the first primetime travelers takes place there. That's where their false door they travel in the past is Abydos, because so look at it and it's not hard to imagine what it looked like 1,300 years ago, because there's paintings still inside. There's still a roof on it. It is gorgeous, but it's hard to get to. You need an extra 3 days to get there. So you have to ask yourself how many days you have, and are you really into the ruins tour, or do you want to, snorkel? It's not a destination for relaxation. It's an adventure. So it is not like going to Costa Rica and looking at some spider monkeys and then going for a swim and then having a Mai Tai. You got to work a little harder to get around. You got to really kind of want to see some things and move a lot. Get ready to the heat. Get ready to go into tombs. Get ready to get into a bumpy car with bad springs in the cushions. Imagine yourself going on an adventure as opposed to a package holiday to the Bahamas, which I don't know. Yeah. Those are nice too. But really, I think most people do very quickly. You fly into Cairo because you have to. That's the entry city. And you might as well spend 2 or 3 days there and see the pyramids. The site south of that called Saqqara, and that's another necropolis. Everything, the Nile was a lifeline then as it is now. And all the tombs of the pharaohs and the elite are always on the west side of that. So if it's a temple, it's on the right mostly, because that's where the living are. And where the sun sets in the west is where you bury people. So Saqqara and Giza, pyramids, the tombs, they're all tombs for pharaohs. So they're always across the river on the west side, the Libyan side. So right below Saqqara, right below Giza, is a place called Saqqara, which is my favorite place. Have you ever seen an image of the step pyramid that goes up rather than flat? That's the earliest pyramid. It's called the Step Pyramid of Djoser. Goes back 4,500 years. And all around there are satellite tombs of the elite, of the people that were buried then. And some of them are absolutely sumptuous and sublime. And a lot of people who zip into Cairo for a day or two before they fly to Luxor skip that. They skip Saqqara and they just do 1 day of the pyramids and then they're out of there. You do 2 days, 3 days, you go to Saqqara, and sometimes you can have these tombs to yourself. And they're just absolutely transporting. They're amazing.
It sounds, well, I mean, kind of otherworldly, which is then kind of meshing real life with what your book is really trying to build out of these places. And it's getting me thinking, too, about people, like some considerations that you might want to have going into a trip like this, including things like claustrophobia or motion sickness, crowds, if you're talking about bumpiness. Yeah, crowds, things like that. So are there any other like sensory components that you notice, like going into tombs with the claustrophobia or anything
claustrophobia is
like
big,
that?
Particularly because we go to a small tomb and they let certain people in at one time. But you'll be a crush of Thebes or Karnak, the temples down on the east side of Luxor. The living side, they can be full of tens of thousands of people. The tour buses of Russians from Hurghada for the day, and they just take over sometimes. So that can be a crush. I think the biggest consideration is going to be stinking hot. You're going to sweat. You need to be hydrated. You need to be prepared to take a dive into the shadows. Some people cannot take it, and they try to do too much at once. So you have to be prepared for it being a bit sticky and uncomfortable. When it's dry, you won't sweat as much as just roast because it's the Sahara. So I would say, too, as much as I love Egypt, female travelers have a different experience because of the misogyny of that part of the world. A friend of mine who was meeting me at Luxor a few years ago got there a few days early. She couldn't wait for me to arrive. She was ready to leave because she was followed everywhere by guys who were just trying to sell her something or just being a little intimidating. I know these guys well enough, not personally, but I know they're the type. They didn't mean her anything more than just trying to intimidate a woman to buy. Not just, that's a terrible thing. But there definitely is a misogynistic culture where it's okay if you're in a group. But a lot of female travelers in all of the Middle East might be a little uncomfortable on their own because there's an aggressiveness sometimes with these touts that can be misconstrued as something that's more dangerous. So I think you have to be prepared for it, be a little tough if you're on your own, if you're a solo female traveler.
That brings up a good point about female
Yeah.
travelers. In countries like this, they probably have to have their shoulders covered and wear, longer pants or skirts or something. Is that the same for the men, or is it just kind of wear whatever you would?
No, Egypt, I know in the other cases, I mean, Egypt is a quote unquote secular country as much as you believe that. And the government for all these countries are just, they're all crap. Let's be honest.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to defend the Sisi regime or the Iranian Ayatollah or anything. There's a lot of governments going on here, politics here, where we might be sliding down the same path. But the good thing about the
Mm.
secular countries like Turkey and Egypt is there was no mandate for a headscarf or the chador. Women can choose it. More and more in Cairo, you see Egyptians, females wearing it, not the covering, but just a headscarf, and that's just their own personal choice. A lot of students or whatever, and often just keeps the men at bay. But no, a tourist is not expected to wear any of those things. Even in Iran, you have to wear a headscarf, a female, but you can show a little hair. So it's they have a different standard for us, obviously, as Westerners, than they do locals. But even in Egypt, at least, the women can dress as they want. Now, I've seen that push to provocative limit some of the tourists, and I mentioned the Russian tourist earlier. And often they're showing up on their air-conditioned coach buses from Hurghada wearing their swim trunks and nothing else sometimes, or a bikini. I've seen bikinis in there. And that is insulting to the
Mm.
Egyptians because it's not always about repression. A lot of it is about that's the dress, as we know. Anytime we go to a different culture, there's a certain respect you have for the human form and how you treat, particularly a holy space. Even though the Pharaonic culture has collapsed and is now Islamic, you're essentially in a church. So while they won't stop you, I look at them and I shake my head and look at these people. It's like, you could at least put on some bloody pants and wear a
Mhm.
hat or whatever. But they will not stop you or fine you. There's not that kind of repressiveness for foreigners and for long term expats as well. I think in more rural cultures where people don't go, the locals may have a much more conservative lifestyle than they do in Karnak or Giza.
So thinking of things like clothing and now knowing that like being respectful but there aren't necessarily specific things to or to not wear, what other packing tips might you have for a trip like this that's in a hot climate, that's you're more active? What is there anything specific you'd recommend?
Um, I mean, I would say male and female should pack long pants. I always wear long pants, not short pants, unless I'm back at the hotel when I'm swimming or whatever. Um, Women should cover their shoulders and down here. So loose fitting linens is the way to go, and you can buy some really wonderful cheap linens in Egypt. You come back with all kind of wonderful stuff you can buy on the street and haggle for or whatever. So I wouldn't pack heavy because a lot of that stuff you can buy really really cheaply over there. But just sensible loose clothing, a hat, obviously a hat. Anything else you can get over there. It's not a culture that you need anything specific. Pack light. I mean, no matter where anyone goes, I always say pack light. I just got back from Turkey, and it was like basically it was this size.
Oh, yeah.
He just again.
Well, I love when the answer is, "Oh, well, there might be some shopping possibilities when you get there." I love that answer.
Got your ears, didn't it?
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. Are there other aspects of the culture um, that maybe similar to what we think about how women need to dress? And that was kind of something we didn't know was the opposite of what our minds were thinking. Are there other aspects of the culture that either maybe we perceive that are not true or that are good to know?
I think the most important thing for a first time tourist to Egypt or the Middle East, India is the same way, and these places where it's a haggle culture, is don't be intimidated by it. I've seen so many first timers get so terrified in the souk when someone tries to sell them a hat for 20 times more than you're supposed to pay for it. It's just business. It's all done in good fun. They're going to sit there and get you tea. They're going to talk about what life is like in Brooklyn or what life is like in Luxor. And there is nothing mendacious. There is nothing violent. There is nothing about it that really should put you people off. And a lot of Westerners, we get very, very stiff about it. We don't like to haggle. We don't like to have to feel like we're being pressured into something. But that is going to happen. And once you realize you can always walk away, they're not demanding you do anything. But at the end of the day, it is just how they do business, and it's not nearly as aggressive as we think it is. It is just simply the way they sell things. And as I try to tell all newbies that go there is, don't be put off by that. Don't think that that's their culture or that's how their manners or otherwise. That's just the men trying to make some money for the family.
That's a good point. Because I think often maybe as women too, we feel like, oh, this man's pressuring us if we say no, maybe there's going to be consequences in our country you're not familiar with. So that's a really good tip. And brings me to another point. What do you recommend people do for spending? Do you bring cash? Can you use your card? A little bit of both?
It's funny. It's not. And I keep referencing Turkey, forgive me, because I got back from 3 days ago. But everywhere in Turkey now, they bring. You can do your Apple Pay everywhere. It's in small towns. Egypt hasn't got there yet, so it's always good to have local currency. They're always happy to take dollars because the dollar is always stronger. But it is still a paper currency in a lot of places there. You go into restaurants in Cairo, and they're just as sophisticated as New York or London. But once you get out of there, it's still old school. It's still good to have paper money shoved in your. ATMs are everywhere, and you can always get an ATM out. But particularly because the one key thing that you always want in the Middle East, and certainly in Egypt, is small bills. Because that's how people survive. It's the bakshish culture, which is they do a little thing for you. They carry your bag, or they help you out, or they bring your tea, or they do something. You give them 10 piastres, 20 pounds, or whatever. It's very cheap. And you want the small bills for that. It's a tip money. So it's always good to have understand the currency and have a bunch of those small bills in your fanny pack or in your purse or whatever else, so you can just pull out. And as often doesn't matter how much it is more of a courtesy, because they do survive on tips in a way far more than here. And you don't want to be getting out your Apple Pay card to tip them 5%. It doesn't exist that way. So it's good to have that paper currency, at least for that person-to-person transactions.
That's really good to know, because tipping culture is different everywhere. Like I was in Croatia and Greece and a couple of other places this summer, and every place is different of like, you tip for this, but you don't tip for that. And here's where it's expected and here's where it's not. Here's the percentage that expected, but here there's nothing. So that's really good to know, because I feel like more and more it is becoming like a question that people really almost worry about when going somewhere else. And I'm speaking from, my own stress about it, but so yeah, that's really, really great to know. Thank you for sharing that. And one thing that I know you often tip for is food. So I would love to get into a conversation on the food in Egypt. What is a typical Egyptian cuisine, and what are some of the best dishes that we should try?
They're very meat based. They got a lot of kebabs and a lot of the ground beef and lamb and that kind of stuff. Obviously, no pork. Fava beans. There's a lot of beans going on there. A lot of yogurt dishes. It's not too different than Mediterranean culture, but it's got an African flair to it. It's never spicy. It can be a little oily because it's cooked in olive oil, so it can be kind of heavy sometimes. But Egypt has the most amazing fruits in the world. You go to Egypt, you see things that are smaller. I remember my first trip, the watermelons. No one can see this, I guess, if it's audio, but they're no bigger than, I don't know, a softball sometimes, maybe a little bigger. And you feel like you're getting ripped off until you bite into it, and all that juice is doubled 10 times over in that small little. Everything's a little smaller and a lot more tasty. The bananas are half the size. So the soil, the Egyptian soil right along the Nile, is just so rich and so fertile that it just produces the most amazing fruits and vegetables. Yeah, I wouldn't say Egypt is a culinary hotspot. I wouldn't say it's like, I don't think there's any Michelin ratings. I don't think Abydos has any Michelin rated star restaurants. It's very simple food, but it's lovely and it's always fresh, and it's always fresh. You got when you're you cannot drink the water in Egypt except for in Cairo. So make sure you go to a place that is a little more for tourists, because I have gotten dysentery in Egypt twice over the years, if by drinking the water, or if it comes from the Nile. So it's one of those places where you have to do your research on that. But if you're at a tourist hotel, if there's a place that's catering to it, the water is fine. They use bottled water. They will clean all the fruits and vegetables with that bottled water. The ice will be bottled water, so you're safe. But if you're in a small village
Yeah.
and someone hands you a cup, stick to your bottled water with a cap on it.
Perfect. And are there vaccinations you need to get to avoid anything else that's
No,
there, or is
it's not
this
that
not one of
awesome.
those places?
No, it's like West
Yeah.
Africa. You need like a yellow fever and some other
Right.
things. Egypt doesn't have that. There's no malaria there.
Okay.
There's the
Hmm.
mosquitoes certainly can be bad along the Nile, but there's nothing of those diseases. That polio has been
Yeah.
eradicated, so it's very 21st century in that regards. What you will get is
Sure.
Pharaoh's revenge. You just get the runs, and you're
Yeah.
dodgy if you drink or eat the wrong thing. And amoebic dysentery is not something I recommend on anybody. I was down and out for 10 days in Cairo once. Not pleasant.
Oh no.
Mhm. Because
Yeah.
I want to
Sounds.
shoot, and I ate the locals cooking. The stonemason. I was shooting a film with the Great Sphinx, my very first one, and it was about the restorers of the Great Sphinx. And they hired all these lovely stonemasons, these Egyptians from East Cairo, which is the poor section, to use the old techniques to restore the Sphinx, but they did lovingly. And I got to know the head stonemason Saeed so well that when it wrapped, he invited me back to his place for dinner. And I couldn't say no because it was such an honor. So I went out there, and he lived in a place which sadly no longer exists. I was there 2 years ago, and I was shocked to see that it's gone. I can understand why for progress, but in terms of transporting, it's a place called the City of the Dead. And what it was the medieval mausoleums that housed the elite from 12 to 15, 1600. Big mausoleums. And after they fell into disuse, people moved into them because they're so roomy. And for hundreds of years, people were born and raised in the City of the Dead. And so did Saeed. Saeed lived in one of these mausoleums. And his family was so happy to see me. And the key thing that I remember about it was during Ramadan. And if you know how Ramadan works, is during Ramadan, people fast during the day and eat when the sun goes down. So I was there in the afternoon, and they're all waiting to eat in the evening. So they're cooking a huge feast. But me being a heathen from the West, I can throw my evil around anywhere and eat any time, So they very graciously offered to give me some food of what they would be eating at sundown at their big party. And I couldn't say no, once again. And I still remember sitting in Saeed's mausoleum, which was a lovely house, now torn down because the government tore them all down to build a motorway. So it's all gone. And the
Hmm.
wife came out with a silver tray, and there were all these trays of the most bizarre looking and questionable foods I'd ever seen in my entire life. But to say no would have been the rudest thing to the Nashashi family. I was not going to look at that and say, oh, this is too dirty for me to eat. I'm going to hit a tourist joint on the way home. So I picked up my spoon
Mm.
and my fork and I dug in. And they all watched me there with smiles and pride on their faces. And I ate it, and I don't know what some of it was good, some of it was questionable, some was just gristle floating in water. But I still tucked it all in. And by the time I got back to my hotel, I was already feeling a bit dodgy. And then the immediate
Oh.
dysentery hit me, and I was down and out for at least 10 days. But
Oh my
I
gosh.
tell everybody I would do the same thing again if I had to.
Yeah.
I'd
I
rather
mean,
take
it's a beautiful memory until the
Yeah.
hotel room part.
yeah. Actually, I stay in a friend's place, and God bless her. There's a good friend of mine. She. This is the day before Cipro too, so it probably could have been cured quicker. But she was telling me in broken English, "You'll be all right. You'll be all right." Just all she fed me was baked potatoes with lemon juice for 10 interminable days. Like that cleared the system or whatever. It was just, that's all she would feed me. She said, just eat this. You'll be fine. No problem. I only found out later when my friend talked to me after it was all over a year or two later. She goes, oh, yeah, while you're eating that, my mother was calling me in Los Angeles and says, what happens if your friend dies? If your friend dies, who do I call? Oh my God, is he going to die? So even she was just putting on a good face.
Well,
But
I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad you're here to
Wow.
tell
I
the
didn't know
tale.
that part of the conversation until a year later.
It's probably a good thing. Oh my gosh, that is an amazing. I mean, you know, dysentery, whatever. But I mean, that's
Those are the stories you tell. I often say no one wants to hear about the beautiful things we have
exactly.
and they want to hear about the horror stories of when whatever happened when you got lost somewhere in Cambodia, or you got crazy diseases, or those are the stories that people want to hear over and over and over again. Not the ones about the
Exactly.
video you had or the great sunset. That's just boring.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, awesome. Well, Neil, I mean, this has been such a thorough and inspiring conversation on Egypt. Like, I'm just so glad that you shared all of your experience. Like, clearly, you know a lot about Egypt and have such a passion for Egypt and kind of that whole region, too. So, thank you for sharing so much. We're going to hop into our Travel Blitz segment now,
Oh
where we're
yes,
going to fire some travel related questions at you. And whatever pops into your head, you let us know.
I'll go with it.
All right, Allie, you want to start us off with our first question?
Yep, and just a friendly reminder, does not have to be answers based on
Okay, good.
Egypt. Can be
There's 69
just travel in
countries I
general.
can dip
Yep.
into.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So starting off with the first one, what is your number one travel tip or hack?
Travel tip or hat? You said?
Yep,
Oh, hack.
hack. Yep, travel tip or
Oh, I don't know
hack.
if I have a
Mhm.
hack. I mean, I did the travel hacks a few times. I don't recommend where you buy two different tickets. Then all you do is you're sitting in the Milan airport worrying about your connecting flight. So forget about the whole travel hack with connecting flights. My travel tip would simply be don't wait. Do not wait. If you want to go anywhere, I don't care if it's the Florida Everglades or if it's deepest, darkest Congo. If that's the thing that you're passionate about, like I said, don't wait for things to get better. Don't wait until whatever you pay off the money for the roof or whatever. If you have financial issues, yeah, you have financial issues, but do not delay. Do not find excuses to travel because once you travel, you'll wonder why you waited so freaking long.
Mm, yes, love it so much. All right, question number 2 here. What are your top 3 favorite destinations that you have been to?
Well, clearly we talked about number one. Um,
Yep.
I mean, I would say Turkey's number two only because I love the ancient world. I love the Eastern Mediterranean, the Greco-Roman ruins, and Turkey is sublime because it goes all the way to east. You can get the very Arab sector side of it, and you can get the Roman side of it, and Ephesus and the Aegean coast, which is sumptuous. So that's a special place too that I've been 7 or 8 times. To get out of that part of the world, I'd say one of my favorite eye-opening destinations would be Myanmar, the former Burma. And again, the political situation now makes it a bit more difficult because there's always a junta there. But I think it's a darker junta now than it was when I went. But it is a land that no one goes to. People go to Thailand or they go to Vietnam, but Burma, because of its restrictions, people assume you can't get in, but you can get a visa very easily from Phnom Penh or from Bangkok. And once you get there, everything is pennies. It is the best food in the world. The peanut sauce, noodles, Myanmar.
Mm.
It has my favorite destination outside of Egypt for ruins, I think. It's a place called Bagan. And if you haven't seen what images it is, after we're done here, Google Bagan and you'll want to go. And it was a bunch of 100 maybe, I don't know how many Buddhist shrines made out of wood that each successive leader would build and try to outdo the other in this vast plain along the Mandalay River. And the culture disappeared and the cities disappeared because they were made of wood, but not these stone Buddhist temples. So now you have this landscape. You get a bicycle and you ride out to this flat, marshy landscape, and there is nothing but Buddhist temples as far as the eye can see. And you can wander to any of them and climb in and watch the sunset, get a bottle of wine, and sit there, claim your own, and then go to another. And once again, because of the history of Burma, a lot of people don't go there, but it is absolutely gobsmackingly beautiful.
Definitely looking that up because never even heard of
Yep.
it. But moving on to the next one, top 3 destinations that you want to go to.
Afghanistan. I love the culture of Afghanistan, the history, the meetings of different cultures in Afghanistan. Again, I wrote a book years ago, which I haven't published this one, about the old hippie trail, the people that would go overland in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Afghanistan was considered Shangri-La then. Clearly, it hasn't been since. It's so war-torn. But I just love the beauty of the landscape and the history, the meeting of the East and the West. So I'd very much like to see it for myself. Inshallah. That means God willing, if in Arabic.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, okay. Question number 4 here. Allie, with your permission, I'm going.
Oh, I need to know. We can move on, yeah.
Oh yeah, go. Oh my gosh.
Pretty quickly, I would say I haven't been to Mongolia or the steppes. I'd like to see that. Um, and what else? I have not been to. I haven't done a safari yet. I still haven't done a safari, so I would tack that on this.
I know that's on both of our lists. That sounds amazing. All right, number 4, I want to change it up a little bit, Allie, if that's okay with you, because there was a question posed earlier that I really need to know the answer to. Where are the best noodles in the world?
I already told you, Burma.
Perfect. Okay.
What's the Burma, lady?
And if it's a peanut sauce, I mean, okay, sidebar too. Like, I try to get pad thai, and I'm in Tampa, Florida, and for whatever reason, all of the pad thai sauce is very, like, sugary sweet. I'm not sure why that's happening. So you said peanut sauce, and I was like, chef's kiss. I'm there for it.
Yeah, no, all that stuff. You won't if you've been to Bangkok,
No.
Thailand, you won't recognize the pad thai. It's a different thing. It's not slathered in sugar. It's like eating Italian food here and then going, to Naples and eating a pizza there. It's like, oh shit,
Yeah.
This is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
There's American taste buds and then there's regional taste buds, and they're two very different things.
Totally.
Good point.
Yeah.
All right, we have one more question for you. And what's the top thing that you can't travel without, besides like a passport, your toothbrush, the obvious things?
Oh, that's without a doubt. I'm such a snob. I'm a coffee snob. So I always travel with the beans that I buy here in Brooklyn. That they have a right mix, unground. So this is, people see this at customs. They shake their head. I have my 3 or 4 bags of unground beans, my grinder, my French press, and then also my travel mug with a top so it doesn't stay cold while I walk around. That takes up half the bloody suitcase.
That's dedication.
Underwear on the back. Yeah, that's snobbery.
Out of curiosity, where are your beans from?
I like to get Hungry Ghost, which is a place down the street. They're a chain here in New York. But there are a few good roasters. I like a Central American blend with a little more of a kick. So I don't like the strong Ethiopian blends or whatever. So It's not like I only like one brand, but when I find something and I travel, I do find that I don't often find the coffee that I want, even if I'm in coffee culture. I can be along the Seine and I can't find the right cup of coffee because what I like only comes from style.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, Neil, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. Is there anything else you want to share before we completely wrap up for the day?
No, we're ready. Anyone who's watching this, either they're travelers, they want to be travelers, but I just can't stress enough. Just do it. My God, if you got a place that is on your bucket list, just book it. Just go. You'll thank me later.
Yes, book it. My mom's favorite saying. Well, awesome. Thank you, Neil. Once again, everybody check out Neil's book, Primetime Travelers, and the new one coming out in October and beyond. And yeah, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. Come escape with us again every other Tuesday for Travel Tuesdays.
Don't forget to give us a subscribe and a follow on all of our social media and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, wander on.